again, these are all great points when it comes to leadership, about the vision, about how to keep these very complicated groups in play. But I want to switch a little bit now to a different focus, which is failure, because you've written before about wartime leadership is learned through hard experience. There's a lot of failure. And we can even focus in this case on Churchill, because as you well know, specifically when you think of Gallipoli, whether he deserves all the blame or not, obviously he's the one who takes the hit on this, and he's learning from it. He learns from it and he applies it. But what is, when you get to 1940, and I know the Battle of Britain is your entry point when you were younger into World War II, what is it when you looked at Churchill and saw these failures, or at least specifically that failure with Gallipoli, and say, boy, he learned the right lesson, and he applied it when it came to 1940?
Yeah, well, it's interesting with Gallipoli. I mean, those naval ships which are told to sort of push on, they don't push on with the kind of vigour in which he suggested when he comes up with the plan in the first place. And he's back in England, and Gallipoli is happening in the Aegean, and I don't think it was the concept so much. I think it was the execution. So I'm not all for blaming Churchill for Gallipoli by any stretch of the imagination. There are all sorts of times where his judgment is brought into question. As Chancellor of the Exchequer during the General Strike in 1926, that wasn't his finest moment by any stretch of the imagination. From a man who was absolutely hopeless with money, the idea that he's Chancellor of the Exchequer is also just risible. He backs the wrong horse in the abdication crisis as well. But he does have this great geopolitical understanding. He's a great student of world history as well as his own history. He understands about thinking outside the box, to use a modern term, and I think that's very good. And what he does is he provides vision. Okay, and this is one of the key things of leadership. You have to bring vision. And when you bring vision, you also invariably bring charisma. And when you bring charisma and vision, then you start to take people along with you for the ride. And people start to, this is a fantastic moment where someone's come up with this idea that maybe if we don't have a harbour in Normandy, we could just make one and tow it across the channel and bring it there. This is the kind of genesis of the Mulberry Harbours. These Mulberry Harbours, there's two of them, which are both bigger than the size of the port of Dover, which is a major port in the UK. And the idea is to create these huge, great concrete slabs, which you're going to have air blocks in them, which you will fill with air so you can float them, and then you take the air out, and then they sink in place. And there's a point where everyone's sort of thinking, we just can't do this. And Churchill just goes, don't argue the matter, the problems will argue for themselves. It's such a honestly, it's such a brilliant mantra. So basically what he's saying is, aim high, work backwards. Don't find the reasons not to do something. Go for it, and then we'll work out how to get around the kind of potential hurdles that we come across, which will never be come across as we come across them. And I think that's, you need that vision. So to go back to 1940, what Churchill understands and which everyone, I talked about the strategic earthquake earlier on. No one is expecting France to lose in 6 weeks. And effectively they lose in 5 days. I mean, by the 15th of May, it's all over. And Prime Minister Paul Reynaud knows that. And he says that, we've lost the battle. But obviously it's all completely over in 6 weeks. This is just not part of the plan at all. And Britain has a very, very small army. Traditionally has always had a very small army. And one of the reasons you have a small army is because where do you put them? And Britain is a small place. If you've got a large army, you've got to move them around in a congested, small little country. That's quite tricky. And you don't need it because you're an island nation. The whole point is Britain's empire and its extra imperial assets have all been built on naval power and command of the seas. So naval power is a big thing. And Neville Chamberlain, when he's Chancellor of the Exchequer in the middle of the 1930s, has the wisdom to understand that actually it's naval power and air power which are the keys to any future conflict. And as long as Britain can be defended, then you can always fight back at a later stage because Britain has global reach, has access to the world's oceans, has access to literally every resource you could possibly want. It's got America on the kind of the right side of the Atlantic. America is the largest oil producer in the world. Venezuela is the second in the 1940s. They're both the right sides of the Atlantic as well. Britain's very conveniently placed for that. That's all good. And the bottom line is, if you've got the world's first fully coordinated air defense system, which Britain develops from 1936 onwards, and is in place pretty much in time by June 1940. That gives you a huge advantage which no one else has had. I mean, that's why the Polish Air Force has been destroyed, the Dutch, Belgium and French Air Force has been destroyed because they don't have an air defense system, but Britain does. So Britain's quite hard to defeat. But in the shock of French defeat and of what's happened in the retreat of the British Expeditionary Force from Dunkirk and all the rest of it. Everyone's just, oh my God, I just can't believe it. They're not thinking straight. There is panic at the highest levels. And Churchill is one of the very few people, because of this big geopolitical understanding that he has, to realize that actually Britain's strength lies in its air power, and particularly its naval power and its island status and its global reach. And that, okay, its army's been defeated and that's not good, but there is no reason to think that they should be defeated. Because the Luftwaffe is not that big, and we've got our air defense system, and it will be impossible, almost impossible, for the Germans to do a cross-channel invasion before defeating the Air Force and the Navy. And they might just about defeat the Air Force, but probably not. But they're certainly not going to defeat the Navy. In other words, a successful cross-channel invasion in 1940 is so unlikely, it's not true, which basically means that Britain can stay in the fight. And if Britain can stay in the fight, then it becomes a battle of logistics and supplies. And in that, Britain is far, far, far better placed than Germany. Because, okay, Germany's got a population of 85 million and Britain's only got a population of 40 million. But Britain has an empire of 500 million. And they're all joining on their side. And they have the world's largest merchant fleet, and 33% or something like that of the world's merchant shipping, and have access to over 80% of the world's merchant shipping. That's really, really useful, i.e. people that will ferry stuff to and from Britain on their behalf. They also have the world's largest navy. For an island nation, that's a pretty good thing. Also, during the 1930s, they've been using their global reach and their empire and all the rest of it to stockpile vast amounts of resources and to buy at guarantee over the price resources on the guarantee that no one else, that these nations will not sell copper, rubber, bauxite, whatever it might be, tungsten, to anybody else. And so that puts them in a very, very good position to fight a long war. And Churchill understands that. And that's when he says his speech, you know, Hitler knows he must beat Britain or surely lose the war. He's absolutely bang on the money. And that is why the Battle of Britain, the air battle for Britain, which involves comparatively few people in the big scheme of things, is one of the biggest turning points. And it is the strategic earthquake for Germany. So the strategic earthquake for the Allies is, and for the West is the fall of France. The strategic earthquake for Germany is the Luftwaffe's defeat in the Battle of Britain, because that means that Hitler then thinks, damn, haven't got rid of Britain, I'm running out of resources, they've been like kids in a sweet shop, the cupboard is bare in most of the occupied territories that they've taken over by the end of 1940, what are they going to do? Here's an idea, let's go into the Soviet Union earlier than we were going to. We were originally thinking kind of maybe 43, 44, we'll build up our strength and go in and kind of overwhelm it. But actually, you know, they're a bunch of Slavs and, you know, untermenschen, so how hard can it be? And of course, you know, what they've completely failed to appreciate is the very underdeveloped nature of the Soviet Union is one of the problems, because suddenly they're in a war of logistics. And traditionally, Germany has not been able to win wars when wars become a war of logistics. You know, the First World War, the reason they lose is because they can't afford it. They don't have access to the world's oceans. They don't have enough resources, blah, blah, blah. It's the same problem in the Second World War. And you know, how Prussia and then Germany have always fought wars is by fighting them very, very quickly with overwhelming force and an envelopment, a Kettelschlacht, with a huge Schwerpunkt, a kind of point of impact, and overwhelm your enemy very quickly. And, you know, they've been doing this, you know, since time immemorial. And that is the plan, you know, in 1914, and it kind of almost works but doesn't, and it's the plan in 1939, 1940, and again it almost works, but they don't defeat Britain. Britain's still there, and hovering on the other side of the Atlantic is the good old US of A, with its potentially untapped kind of, you know, industrial muscle, which could be turned into war material, and from that moment on, it's kind of game over. I think you can argue fairly convincingly that Germany is not going to win by September 1940, and it's certainly not going to win by the end of 1941. And you know, we were talking about this earlier on, but you know, if you take an arbitrary date of let's say the middle of June 1941, Germany's got one enemy, which is Britain plus Dominion and Empire. Fast forward 6 months to the middle of December, it's got three enemies. It's got Britain plus Dominion and Empire, USSR, and the USA. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to win. How long it takes, whether it's months, years, many years, decades, how many people are dead at the end of it, how much destruction has been caused, all that is up for grabs. But the eventual outcome, I would argue, is no longer in doubt.